right, y'all want to get started? So my name is Travis. I'm a reporter here in town. I work at New Orleans Public Radio, report on the coast and the environment. And so this panel is all about the coastal master plan. You know, we all probably in this room have heard about the state of the coast and the rapid land loss. The state, of course, has a plan to deal with it, coastal master plan. And so this panel is kind of all about how adequate is that plan? Is it addressing things it should address? So we've got some great panelists. And first up, we're going to hear from Scott Eustace at the Gulf Restoration Network. And then we'll hear from Simone Malaz and Lynn Barr. Afterward, we'll do like a 20-minute Q&A up front, and we'll do loads of questions from the audience.
And if there are any specific legal things, I'm your legal moderator for CLE purposes.
Right.
You'll be hearing from him.
Can people hear? Is the microphone working? Is it in the back? Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's right, because I'm not a lawyer. I studied as an ecologist at the University of Georgia, Athens. After growing up in New Orleans, after the storm, a lot of that changed, right? A lot of things changed from the coastal planning perspective, a lot for the better. I came back to New Orleans, rebuilt the house and all that, and found myself working for an environmental advocacy organization, the Gulf Restoration Network. And today we're going to have panelists with a lot of deep knowledge about the adequacy of Louisiana's coastal master plan. After 7 years as the coastal wetland specialist for GRN, I'm now the community science director, trying to get people out to look at their waters and wetlands to defend them. My granddad did this out in Black Bay, oil drilling, which, when you look across the coast, is a huge impact. I think largely we're going to talk about other things today, although this looms large in our concerns about Louisiana as a coastal state compared to others. My talk is the limits of the best, because we do think Louisiana's coastal master plan, with its 5-year iterated process based on a very advanced scientific modeling. The model takes like 8 months to a year to run. We don't see that in other coastal states. And that's combined with a lot of transparency, 2 meetings a month. You can go on the website and look at the discussions that are being had in Baton Rouge. Also with a strong coastal authority over all other coastal agencies. So there are limits to the plan, but as a model for governance across the Gulf Coast, we think it's a good example. Just a little bit about us. We have this Gulf-wide perspective for the past 24 years, and we're a bit aggressive in our defense of the natural resources. And we also look at the offshore environment. So in some cases, we differ with the state of Louisiana on those issues. We look across the coast, and the different states. We only got a little bit of Texas in here. Have different. They all have coastal plans. They all have different conservation initiatives. I think Florida and Louisiana have the biggest bureaucracies in support of land conservation, which is wetland conservation on the Gulf Coast. Right. This is the wetland coast of the United States, and all of the states have a lot of wetlands. Florida and Alabama are very concerned with their beaches, so we've been struggling with the state of Alabama. They might want to spend restoration monies on tourism instead of ecological restoration of their marshes and beaches. Mississippi, since Katrina, has the MISSIP plan. We heard yesterday, if you're in the private funding for restoration panel, it had a good discussion about what they call their beneficial use plan for their barrier islands. But the other components of their coastal plan, they lack a central authority. It lacks implementation. They struggle with some of these same housing issues, coastal housing issues that we struggle with in Louisiana. But the discussion of those issues isn't as advanced as Louisiana. In Louisiana, we have many parts of the coast that, I'm from New Orleans, and the state plan is for me. I mean, the authority was created after the storm of Katrina. It wasn't the first time the state had been interested in the coastal problem, but that really galvanized the creation of the CPRA was the federal flood of Katrina. And a lot of the discussion is about how to use the river to restore. But for example, we have, no one on our DS today talking is from Cameron. So people in Cameron sometimes feel a little left out, even though there's a lot of progress being made. And also the Atchafalaya Basin is a treasure for the planet Earth. There's no other swamp ecosystem like that on the planet. It's the last remnant of an ecosystem that once extended all the way to southern Illinois. All that green. There are tremendous sediment issues, flood risk issues, the kinds of issues you'd think as a state we would incorporate those into the coastal master plan and prevent all the sediment that's destroying the swamps in the basin. We need that sediment to continue to flow to Wax Lake Outlet. So it's a tremendous environmental concern, a tremendous flood risk concern. It's not a part of the plan. So, although after Katrina, the CPRA came together as a central authority, it integrated a lot of concerns like never before. We still find that there are concerns that are a little less integrated than others that we need them to be. And this is Dan Swenson's graphic about the geology of our area, just saying that where we sit today, it wouldn't be here if not for the action of the river. This is his graphic of a cartoon of 3,000 years ago. The river put sediment over the Pine Island feature. So instead of being on a barrier island, we're not sitting on Ship Island, an ecosystem like Ship Island in Mississippi. We're here in the alluvial plain built by the river. So that's a very important process that I think the master plan has bravely taken on and done a good job. We have to restore the river, even though there are so many user groups with very different ideas about what the river is for. It's a tremendous government challenge, and I do think the state is to be commended for taking it on. There's limits to just sediment, to what we're able to do. There was a design challenge competition called Changing Course, and this was one of the rosier views of what we can accomplish with more than $50 billion. You see a lot of sediment diversions, ideas about how the river can sustain the delta over time, even with the sea level rise that will leave us with less land than we have today. I think a lot of us have always known that. I think in the state has had differing communications efforts about whether or not we'll actually be able to build land going forward. I think coming from a science background and concerned with climate change and sea level rise, I think we always thought that we were just running really hard to stay in place. We have a treasure of the coast. We're just trying to keep it and keep things intact. You'll notice, I think this is rosy, we still lose the bird foot, and so we're losing areas. Chauvin, Terrebonne, Pointe-Chien, Ilges and Charles, they're on the edge of the map. It's a very tenuous situation for many communities that are dear to our heart, and a lot of people, there's a grieving process going on, right? A lot of people are angry. There's bargaining. But I think the state does a good job at least starting the conversations. Not that they couldn't do better, and hopefully I'll get to that. So yeah, there's a lot of accomplishments in implementing a lot of the different restoration and protections plans, some of which have been on the books for decades. So that may be a flaw of CPRA. Sometimes they take a lot of credit for work that other organizations and other bureaus have been working on for a long time. I know that, with the money from the BP oil litigation, CPRA was finally able to spend more money on restoration than on levies. The plan envisions about a 50-50 split. And there's only a little bit that we, as an environmental advocacy organization, that are worried about that, we feel are inappropriate infrastructure projects. In Alabama, that's hotels. In Louisiana, it tends to be different transportation projects related to industrial development. We're not friends of that on a good day, and so that's what we keep an eye on when we think about, well, is this money being spent correctly, at least from our perspective. You can see that's minimal. Most of the expenditures are on levees, as well as coastal restoration, and that's mostly created marsh and created barrier islands. Those barrier islands were the vision of USGS, Dr. Shea Penland, other people for decades. The BP finds were this opportunity to finally construct an amazing dune ecosystem out at the end of the bays. But I guess we support the plan tremendously. We're kind of like the evergreen critics, I think, is our role. It's never quite hit the $1 billion a year you might expect. I think in 2012 we heard more about it. This is a $50 billion plan over 50 years. And I know that's a bit of a simplification, but if that's true, then we should be trying to meet that $1 billion a year expenditure. We never really got there. I think the peak was 2013 at like 960. So given that we kind of fall short of that big goal, not to discount the tremendous success that this represents, but given that we fall a little short, we at GRN as the supportive critics, I guess, are trying to find ways that the state could improve incrementally. And this is just, again, this is about LA1, but there's other roads that are sometimes funded by the master plan. After 2012, I think there was this feeling about, we have a lot of money, and we don't need to put that in the plan. I do think that project, I think a lot of the people behind in the LA1 coalition see themselves as part of the coast, so they do see, they do think that, and I think we can respectfully disagree that they are part of this plan or not. And I'll talk about a rail project at the end. We don't quite meet the $1 billion a year. That's our expectation, I guess, from 50 billion over 50 years. But the transparency from CPRA is nice. With the annual plan that's released every year, we're able to look at how the money is being spent. We don't have that in the other states. I'm able to look at it and see that for 3 years we're spending $2.72 billion over fiscal year 2019 to 2021. And when we break it down, we see that the BP litigation and settlement is the majority of that. So thank you, lawyers, for working hard to win money for our state, for our levees, and our coast. We do have recurring monies from the state, kind of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and the state is increasing. And if you heard Chip Klein's talk, which I recommend you check out if you missed it yesterday, I hope it's up on YouTube. He talked about increasing that state portion with different regulations, and he's not going to say regulations, but promoting different state initiatives to have the state itself fund the program. We have the BRO Act and other federal monies like community block grants that provide roughly 12% over the next 3 years. And then this being Louisiana, 16% of the plan is funded by a conflict of interest, or the Go Mesa monies. We at Gulf Restoration Network are concerned with the offshore environment, so we are concerned with all of the spills that we have and all of the problems like the Taylor energy spill, which is, has been going for 14 years and may go for the next 100. These impacts are very important, especially in the wake of BP. And, in 2016, we had a lot of juvenile sperm whale strandings, for example. And so we see our Gulf is heavily damaged from BP and other injuries offshore. I think there were 4 sperm whale strandings in 2016. This is just one in Little Florida Beach in Cameron Parish. So we don't see the Go Mesa monies as it's not a happy situation. We support funding the master plan, but we worry that relying on that stream of revenue ties the plan to the destruction of Florida, for example, where a lot of our board is. And a lot of members and a lot of money comes from those states, Texas and Florida, that have considerable, more people than our other states. So yeah, we don't oppose the Go Mesa monies, but we're skeptical. We're skeptical of the role of the oil and gas industry in the plan. When we see progress, this is a Quipper project in the Magnolia oil field. We do think the oil companies are liable for all of that returning to marshes. The Quipper program is able to restore part of it, and the state plan similarly envisions restoring part of it. But then when there is restoration, there are certain folks' interests that are taken into account, right? That oil canal, which many of the canals, those canals, access canals and wells, never produce, unfortunately. So that canal could have produced for a few years. It might have been shut in the 70s. But, the industry maintains that needs to be left open. You can't turn that back into marsh because we need to get back in there sometime in the, it's 2018. I don't know when, people are going to, but it's left open as part of the restoration. Right, too long. I was going to, let's whip through some river conflicts. I think this is where some of the greatest challenges, and I think the greatest bravery the state is showing, is on engaging with this challenge of restoring the river to its estuary. There's no ecosystem like this in the entire world where you have such a strong river into such a gentle sea. It builds land, and that's why we're here. So this is the old vision for the Myrtle Grove sediment diversion, now the Mid-Barataria, that it would come across in between Ironton and Phillips 66 and distribute sediment from a sandbar into an old oil field. There are conflicts, and we feel that the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority has authority over wetland permitting and coastal use permitting that it could take a stronger role in. There was a coal terminal that we were advised by folks in Ironton. They're already breathing a lot of coal from other facilities nearby. They didn't want another one, but we looked at the plats, and it did seem that putting this thing in the river right where we're going to have a structure taking a lot of water, like a Niagara Falls, out of the river, probably a bad idea. Let's not do that. We objected, the CPRA objected, but what happened, and a very good study was funded, but rather, normally you'd think the company would have, if they're going to impact the environment, they would have to do an environmental impact statement. They'd have to study and justify with the geology why that, this terminal is here. I never have confirmed this, but probably CPRA paid for that study out of this limited money, right? And then it went, instead of going through a transparent process, it went into what's called a memorandum of agreement, where CPRA, through like kind of a private process, was having discussions with the company, where we think that all of those discussions should have been part of the public coastal use permitting process. We did end up going to court This was permitted. Unfortunately, we did go to court over it, and the judge ruled in our favor. And then Ironton also waged a campaign against it at the parish level. And so Ironton really, we think Ironton showed up for the diversion. You know, their concerns are air, coal trains, and the coast. They want to be there in 100 years. And so I think we want to respect that this community rose up and protected the state program. So we are concerned now, part of the Mid-Barataria diversion, that channel, part of the funding may include an expansion and you know, every inch of this rail bridge into Ironton is an expansion of the existing right-of-way. And so, you know, that might be 25 million or 50 million. We don't think it's appropriate to spend Department of Justice money for sediment diversions on that rail expansion, particularly when a diversion advocate, the community of Ironton, they've fought for decades against this in their community. There are other challenges. The Pin Oak facility you see the oil terminal, again, right in front, and we know we had a 100-gallon spill just last month. In that area from this existing terminal, they are expanding to include a lot more oil storage. So we are worried about this kind of conflict. We do think that you know, the Coastal Authority could be stronger in demanding an alternatives analysis. We don't have to site that storage facility exactly on top of the diversion. And the newest one, which is very interesting, is a conflict. You talk about people who have been left out of the plan. Oyster restoration is an extremely important part of the state of Louisiana. We have very many groups interested in it, but I do think we have people want more. This is interesting because this is an accidental sediment diversion process where we got about $1.4 billion in river restoration for free. The river broke through a road and a former control structure. The Plaquemines Parish is proposing to just block it off. In the 5 years that this river has been flowing, it's restored hundreds of acres of land, but now for the sake of salinity control, they're proposing to stop that. So when the river naturally restores the land like we are trying to design, you know, will CPRA come and protect that natural function? That's an amazing. It's an amazing question. We think that really the point is we need more for the oyster reefs. We need more for the oyster industry, and there's probably alternatives to blocking this river restoration than it. Just to finish up, we need to integrate some of the resiliency measures. We've got a tiny, 1/10 of the money we need to relocate people. I'm not the expert on relocation, but a community down in Terrebonne has had a struggle over the past 40 years since all the discussions about the Morganza levee sparked their interest in preserving themselves. And over those decades, they've advocated first to be inside the levee, and then when that wasn't going to be, that wasn't going to happen, for relocation. And so we might hear about this story and think that it's a recent thing. This is a 40-year story of the community themselves on the coast, realizing their situation, mourning their situation in a way, and fighting for themselves for those monies. So we do think that story could be told in a different way than it sometimes is. People on the coast need to have this information so they can fight for themselves, because that is how we've gotten money in the past. So.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
Yeah. So next up, we're going to hear from Simone Malaz, who is the Executive Director of Restore Retreat, a coastal advocacy nonprofit based in Florida.
Yes, thank you. We did to not coordinate too much on what our presentations would be, but I think you'll see that in the way that we talk, we've all worked together for a long time, and many people don't always understand the differences between all the different NGOs that work on these issues, but I think if you ask me and Scott and Lynn, we could definitely tell you every single difference about each NGO that works on this. But many times Scott and I are on the same side, and we wrote actually annual plan comments together, a group of us, and sometimes we're not on the same side. But I think at the end of the day, what you need to know about the NGOs working here in Louisiana is that I think we all do respect our work, and we do respect the different lanes that we each work in. And so today I just want to provide, I usually provide color commentary, but I really think Lynn's going to cover color commentary today. But I want to tell you about my own experience working in Louisiana's coast, where I grew up, but then also tell you about my own interaction with the master plan and what I think that we're doing to move the ball forward as we move to the next plan, which is in 2022. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Simone Theriault Malaz, so there's no denying that I am from Terrebonne Parish. I grew up in Houma. After a brief stint in Austin, which was a very beautiful city, I decided to come home and I finished school at Nichols State University, which ironically is where our office is today, in a dorm. I didn't live in a dorm when I went to Nichols, but now I have a dorm for an office at Nichols. So I work for a NGO called a 501c3 called Restore or Retreat, and we were actually formed in 2000, so we've been around for 18 years. And so how Restore Retreat came about is we, a group of business and industry leaders, driven by business and industry, formed a 501c3 modeled, ironically, after the LA1 Coalition, which is another an advocacy organization that wanted to elevate the highway to Port Fourchon and Grand Isle. But the idea between the same business and industry folks putting together LA1 and focusing on restoration was that we needed to focus on one single issue in one single area. And there was so much worth to that. We are in the Barrett area in Terrebonne Basins. That's the area that we concentrate in. So from the Atchafalaya to the Mississippi River, obviously experiencing some of the worst land loss. But back in 2000, Restore Retreat set a mission that, and it is still our mission today, that we are going to advocate for the aggressive implementation of large-scale restoration projects in the Barrett area and Terrebonne Basins. And you can imagine that it has swung wildly from 2000, what large scale meant, certainly what aggressive meant. But I do agree with Scott, certainly after 2005 is really when the state galvanized their restoration and protection programs. So I actually began at Restore Retreat in January of 2005. I remember one of the first things I did, and Lynn will remember this, we were signing a chief's report for the Louisiana Coastal Area Study at the end of January. And then, of course, everyone knows what happened later on in 2005. So I was living here in the city at the time for Katrina, but then Rita is what really devastated where I came from in Terrebonne Parish. So a storm that hit all the way closer to Texas had a magnificent impact in Terrebonne, and so many resources were concentrated in New Orleans at the time. And I remember Jerome Zarang, who was the chairman of the CPRA for a time and is now a state representative. He was actually the head of the levee district at the time, and he was on the phone begging the Corps of Engineers to bring some of their resources from New Orleans to Terrebonne just a couple of months after Katrina. We needed those sandbags. We needed those Chinook helicopters. We needed some of those resources. Then, of course, just a couple years later, we had Ike and Gustav, and then, of course, the oil spill. And so where I began in that, I had a little bit time to learn about what had happened in the past, but certainly all the rules of the game changed in 2005 and moving forward. So I do remember that process of putting together the 2007 master plan. I do remember that. It was very conceptual. It's funny to even look at the maps now about it was just a big triangle right here, and that was a diversion, and a big circle here, and that was something else. So of course the plan is built to evolve, and I think that's one of the beauties of the plan. plan. In between 2007 and 2012, we had the oil spill, and so certainly things needed to be adjusted. 2012 was certainly a refinement of the 2007 plan, and you can see that. You can see that in the amount of data and the amount of work that went into it. And so we really wanted to get engaged in the 2017 plan. We were at a little different position at Restore Retreat through some outreach and involvement opportunities that we had. And so we made it a point to get more involved in the 2017 master plan. We actually had a seat on the framework development team, which is something that Scott described the process of. They had about 35 or so advisors from federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, state agencies working together on the plan. They had different focus groups: community, navigation, oil and gas, fisheries. They had different focus groups. And then what our real role that we took on in the 2017 master plan was the development of outreach and engagement. And so it started when, in 2015, we were actually approached by the CPRA to work on something called the Flood Risk and Resiliency Viewer. And this is a Google type interface. You can go on the CPRA's website today and look at this. And you can actually type in a specific address. You can type in your home address, you can type in your grandma's address, you can type in your ex-girlfriend's address, whatever you want to do. You can type in that specific address, and up will come your flood risk, the master plan projects planned for the area, the land loss, and because of the data that feeds into that plan, which is all the data used in the master plan, it's been updated to 2017 now, and it includes coastal vegetation. It also includes social vulnerability, which is a factor that went into the master plan. So you today can go onto this viewer, and Scott talked a little bit about transparency. You can go into this viewer, you can type in an address, you can find out how many English-speaking residents are there, how many disabled residents, how many low-income residents. So all of that is on this master plan viewer. As a nonprofit, we thought it was a really great way to engage with folks. Get them to type into their address. Of course, you can look at it from a coast-wide view, but so many times people want to know what's happening in my front yard, what's happening in my neighbor's front yard. And so we got involved in this opportunity where we were able to debut that viewer to residents across the state. And so we were part of a team of nonprofit organizations and state and federal agencies that debuted this plan across the coast. And we went from Lake Charles all the way over to Southwest Louisiana. And we went into communities. But the CPRA, total credit to them, had this idea where we don't do it usual public meeting style, right? We wanted to feed people. We wanted to make sure that we had the right people there. And we wanted it to be more of a conversation. So we were part of that, and I guess that was around 2015, the development and the refinement, what that viewer looks like, and then debuting it to the community. And so we thought about that idea and how well that conversation went over, where people just didn't stand in front of somebody and talk in front of them, but they had a chance to get on a computer, talk about their address, point to a map, point to where something important used to be to them or that is currently. And so we took that idea, and through the support of the Greater New Orleans Foundation, we launched something ahead of the 2017 master plan called the Community Conversations. And we held those. I think we ended up having 8 that we were responsible for across the coast. We had hundreds and hundreds of people attend. We held them in non-traditional places where we knew that they weren't going to host public meetings for the master plan, the official public meetings. So we had it in Dulac, we had it in Buras, we did go all the way, we went to Lake Charles, we had it in St. Bernard, and we held these same kinds of conversations. We intentionally put round tables. We fed people, super important here in Louisiana to feed them. And then we had these conversations, and on the middle of every table was a map, and they had 2 maps. It was 2-sided. One side was the red map from the master plan of what they thought land loss was going to be, what the predictions were for 2017. And the back side of it was the a whole suite of projects that could go into the master plan. And we had CPRA personnel assigned to every table, and we had real conversations. And it was a great way to kind of get out into the community, certainly before these public meetings. We knew that that is not the time to have that discussion. Certainly after that, we built, LA Safe came in and did the same thing recently to have the same discussion, that idea, if you feed people, just kidding, you put them at a table, they want to have a discussion and they don't want to, through the NEPA process, not answer a question. And so that was one thing that we were engaged with in the 2017 master plan. We did participate in the framework development team and followed the focus groups. From that community conversation led to an additional opportunity for engagement and outreach where we translated the draft master plan and then eventually the final master plan into French, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And so we wanted to make sure that that was accessible to the community. And then we also led a digital effort where we put both the draft and the master plan on a flash drive. We saved thousands and thousands of pages of paper, but also we put other resources on that flash drive so that friends could take it to their neighbor's house, they could look at it at home, they could take it to their local library if they didn't have a computer at home. So the library thing got us thinking. In Terrebonne and Lafourche, our libraries are tremendously utilized because people still don't have home computers or easy access to the internet. And so that when we were speaking to people about that, we launched another effort supported by the Greater New Orleans Foundation where we are putting master plans in all of Louisiana's libraries with the help of the state library. Anybody have any guess on how many libraries there are in the state of Louisiana? Steve Cochran cannot answer. He knows this answer. He's heard 340. 340 libraries from North Louisiana to South Louisiana are going to have a checkout kit where you can check out the master plan in its hard copy, in its digital format, and then we also produce some large format posters for the libraries to display. With a letter from the state librarian explaining why the state library was involved in this process, we're very proud that we're trying to get all of Louisiana to understand that our issue affects everyone. So those are some of the things that we did concerning 2017 master plan. Scott mentioned a few projects. We follow projects in that master plan. We follow Increase Atchafalaya. We follow Whiskey Island. We follow the Barrier Island chains. We follow some ridges. So we actually follow those projects all throughout the year and have good contacts with the project managers. We help them with outreach and engagement opportunities, if we can, with the landowners or with different user groups. And so we do not just help on the outreach engagement on the bigger plan, but the actual individual plans as well. Some of those meetings go well, some of them not so well, so maybe we need to feed them, right? One thing that Scott talked about a little bit, which I'm very glad he laid the groundwork for, is, again, I'm not a scientist. I have a BA in mass communication, surprise, surprise. Certainly not a lawyer, married to one, that doesn't help me any lots. But we wanted to, because of our business and industry background, we wanted to get into the money of it all. So we knew as soon as the 2017 master plan was passed, and even before that, frankly, that people were going to ask, where's the money coming from to implement this plan? Some of my very good friends say that we definitely don't have enough money to do such a thing, and so we wanted to start tackling that right away. And so we partnered, again, with the CPRA to lead an effort to look at the different funding streams that we have available now. I've heard Garrett and Z say it before. At one point, they had 42 different funding streams funding coastal projects in Louisiana. But that money is colored different ways. It has lots of strings. If you look at just the post-Deepwater Horizon money through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, that money is only for barrier islands and diversions. Okay, so you can only spend your money on that. Natural resources damages can only be spent on injuries, right? GOMESA has a little bit more wiggle room, but as Scott mentioned, that is now an unstable source of funds that we can't count on as much as we thought we were going to. So it's very complicated. Also, the terms of the settlement over 15 years also dictates that we cannot spend money that we don't have. And so CPRA wanted to, so we partnered with CPRA, bringing this kind of business mind to it, that we wanted to maximize and leverage the funds that we have available. Instead of just looking at a pay-as-you-go system, and one of the things Scott mentioned is that we haven't hit that billion-dollar point yet. In this annual plan, it's projected that in 2 years from now, the annual expenditures in the coastal program would be $990 million. So still not hitting that $1 billion mark. But one of the reasons why is because of how that money comes in. A large majority of the Deepwater Horizon money is grant reimbursable, which means that the state of Louisiana has to fork over the money first, and we know that these projects are hundreds of millions of dollars. The state of Louisiana has to put that money up first and get paid back. So what can we do? What is happening in the market that we can figure out? What is happening in New York? What's happening in DC actually has an innovative project to make sure that we can get some of that money sooner, or that we can not just pay as you go. There is a value to us doing projects sooner rather than later. Not just efficiencies in projects and MOB and demob and things like that, but also in the fact that we can't wait 5 years. We can't wait for hurricane seasons to do that. So we took on this deep dive. Truth be told, we didn't really know what we were getting into. So we started a process where we did a statement of interest and qualifications. So we could figure out, we could just see what that temperature of that water is, right? To see who would be interested in this. We were blown away by the interest from all over America, from some of the smartest people, some of the most practical people, people that have worked in coastal Louisiana for a tremendously long time, some people that never heard anything about coastal Louisiana except for $10 billion, and they wanted a little piece of that. So we had a tremendous interest in this. At the end of the day, we ended up with over 10 teams submitting statement of interest and qualifications. Of those 10 teams, there were over 40 individuals and whole firms that participated on those 10 teams. And so we narrowed it down to 4, and we have finally, we're in the kickoff process. We have Ernst & Young Infrastructure Advisors, which has a team of different people. And right now, they're looking at the current funding streams available, what those restrictions are to those funding teams. Then they're looking at what can we do in terms of innovative and maybe traditional funding sources instead of maybe just a pay-as-you-go system. And then how can you piece all of that together to have a more robust, complex financial strategy for the state? You know, we do have a lot of science. We had, for the master plan itself, it had a resilience technical advisory team, it had a science technical advisory teams, they had modeling teams, but we really now, we needed to figure out how can we pay for these projects. And so Restore Retreat was really proud to be part of this figuring out the money on how we can put more projects on the ground sooner rather than later. We did realize, though, when we were doing the overall finance report, that GOMESA was this lingering issue that has changed probably within the last 6 months pretty wildly, right? We found out that we're getting half the money that we thought we would because of production, but then we also found out that Trump kept it in the budget, which was different than the last Trump and the last Obamas where they tried to take it out. And now we're hearing that Secretary Zinke has a proposal on the table that would actually reduce royalties to the individual states. So GOMESA is this topsy-turvy, wild animal, but it's really important to that cash flow that is needed because we have to put projects on the ground, but it's not as dependable as it used to be. So some of the last things I just wanted to mention that we're working on, we work on annual plans. To us, the master plan is this 5-year process that is good, that it changes. We look forward to the next plan when it comes up. But the spending vehicle is the annual plan. It projects this year and the 3 years forward. You will see what project priorities they have on the books. For us, that's the devil in the details. And so a lot of us work on the super unsexy annual plan, which is a whole bunch of ledger sheets and things like that. But for us, there are so many things buried in that, including past successes from the year, but also what their spending priorities are for the years forward. So that is something that we're working on. We're working on the Financing the Future. We're working on the GOMESA spinoff, and we're already looking forward to 2022 for sure. We're thinking about what could be done differently. Nothing is set in stone about the process, just that it has to be updated every 5 years. So that's something that we're looking at. And then finally, we're working on another leadership program back in our part of the world in Terrebonne and Lafourche, where we're starting a coastal leadership program. And so we're actually going to engage in some community community mapping. We're going to have some leadership classes that have classroom style. We're going to have field trips. We're going to have community engagement opportunities. And then hopefully all of that will end in a restoration project in our area. So we're working on the big picture, but we're also drilling down too. So I wanted to be able to share our experience in dealing with the master plan in the past and how we are trying to move the ball forward as we move forward to 2022. Thank you. You can have my extra 4 seconds, Lynn.
Oh, good, thank you.
Next up, we'll hear from Len Barr.
Okay. Are you ready for a change of pace?
Lynn asked to go last.
I asked to be last. This, you know, I want to congratulate Scott and Simone for a lot of stuff that a lot of the details. I want to challenge this whole thing with really what I call the big picture, and it has to do with science. It has to do with the hostility to science in the nation that I don't understand. As a former scientist, my older sister and brother-in-law last August went to St. Louis from San Antonio, where they live, to see the incredible astronomical phenomenon, which was a total eclipse of the sun, following a path across the country. St. Louis was convenient to them. It turns out that, of course, it was an incredible success in terms of demonstrating the capability of the scientific world to predict in detail the thing within seconds. It went exactly as expected. And I couldn't believe after it was all over that the national media wasn't saying, look, folks, our science is good. We can depend on it. Why do you keep denying climate change? I mean, much of the same information and intellectual capacity is based on both. Anyway, I want to say something positive about the master plan having to do with science. I'm under the impression, having spent some time going through it, that the real science, the real value of the new version, the 2017 version over 2012, was the nature of the science. There were some really top people, both in-state and out-of-state, doing very sophisticated modeling and using LIDAR for elevation and subsidence rates, and I know a few of the folks. I have great respect for them, and I understand that effort was put together, was overseen by TWIG, the Water Resources Institute of the Gulf, with their new head, Justin Ainsworth. If that's the case, I want to give Justin a big pat on the back, because the science in the body of the master plan, there's not much science, frankly. Okay, now I've got my top 10 reasons for. Okay, let's start with a need for disclaimer. This isn't it, but could you? I don't know why somebody keeps changing the
Which one
thing.
is it?
Just go to the first slide, second slide. Okay.
This is the second one.
Okay. Here's my summary. It's too ambitious yet too limited, and I'll explain that. Too safe yet too cautious. Too optimistic yet too modest. Finally, it's far too expensive to be realistically affordable, and I'm not going to insult you by reading any more, I don't think. But I would argue that plan on the very first page with the governor's signature, needed to have an explicit disclaimer on climate change. I mean, let's face it, that's what we're up against. The other day I read a quote from Noam Chomsky, who I have great respect for, and I've seen some other philosopher intellectuals say the same thing. That right now the world is threatened with two major phenomena. One is possible nuclear disaster, and the other is climate change. We need to be saying that. We need to be telling the people. Steve Scalise calls it a hoax. Well, my God, how can we expect support from the country on technical needs when our delegation is sending, except, poor Governor Edwards doesn't have much chance against that kind of a message. And of course, at the top, at the administration level, we know what climate denial is. Okay, next slide. This is a figure from the Appendix C of the master plan that shows what we all feel and what you've been hearing from Simone and Scott. If we spent $50 billion, and we know that that's not too likely because the money's not there right now. We wouldn't be gaining land. We'd be still losing on a very serious net scale. 8,000 square kilometers in net loss. Or is that the right number? Anyway. So it's not success. This is the real science is showing a very, very sobering picture. Okay, next slide. And of course, the uncertainty. I would argue that any plan that goes beyond 10 years we're fooling ourselves. Things are so unstable in the world right now that politically and environmentally, the terrorism and the droughts and the floods and the forest fires and the hurricane threats are such that we can't realistically predict how to spend $50 billion or $100 billion as Mark Davis has estimated it would really cost over 50 years. Let's concentrate on much closer time horizons. The next slide, which is very dark. I don't know why it turned out to be so dark. This is a new PowerPoint thing that mostly I want to show. This is about oil and gas. We in the state, we pretend that in developing the master plan, we pretend that oil production globally and cost is going to pretty much be the same for 50 years. That's not the case. It's going to cost more to produce oil. It's going to cost. It's going to be result in a net decline in what's called the EROI, the energy return on investment. It's going to decline. Just as if we depend on a dredge and pump strategy to rebuild marshes and the Barrier Islands, that's going to get extremely expensive, and it seems to ignore. It's like we're doing this master plan in a vacuum, not recognizing what's going on in other parts of the world and trends. The need to leave most of the oil and gas in the ground. We can't afford to keep pumping it out and burning it. We've got to make a difference in greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, next. Okay, this slide shows. Now I'm going to talk some radical stuff about our plan. The upper figure, which is again too dark to see very well, but shows the planning footprint of the restoration of the whole state. I would argue that we should, as we heard from our two previous speakers, the river is the key. Using the river beneficially is our only hope. And I would say that much as I hate to tell our friends in the Cheniere Plain, I think the Cheniere Plain should be not included in the master plan. It needs to have its own separate plan because it's not, it functions, it was created, it was formed in a different way. Most of the sediment supply came from offshore, not from the river. There's no good riverine source of sediment for the Cheniere Plain. And I'm not writing it off. I'm just saying that we need to focus on the eastern part, southeastern part of the deltaic plain. And as I want to get back on what Scott said, the Atchafalaya Basin, my God, we can't leave that out of the master plan. That's a joke, a bad joke. The opposite of the old river control structure is one of the largest control structures in the world. How else can we manage, optimize flows between our two biggest distributaries, except by using that ORCS? The Corps of Engineers would hate this idea, of course. They don't want to hear anybody say that sacred 70-30 split is, we can't jeopardize that. Well, hell with that. There's been an Atchafalaya program at the Department of Natural Resources. It's been there for years and years. It's done nothing. It's been managed by DNR and the Corps. They don't want anybody touching it. They never have. I say, this is craziness. Okay, and by the way, we could talking about money by focusing on river diversion projects, mostly on the southeastern part of the state. We could spend our money much more wisely. And I've got another bullet on that coming up in a second. So, in other words, without the Atchafalaya Basin, and the plan ignores a huge opportunity to optimize sediments. Now, here's the most incredible thing that has been ignored inexplicably to me for 2 years now. Since 2016, some very credible scientists, including led by Paul Kemp, made an observation that ever since, I guess it was Robert Mead used to be the head of, or the top guy at the U.S. Geological Survey. He showed how the river was carrying only 50% of the sediment that it used to carry before a series of dams was built on the Missouri River drainage basin. Small dams. They were built for conservation purposes, for bird habitat or something good, I'm sure. But the dams have all filled in. They've trapped all this sediment, and it would be fairly doable to create plumbing systems that would allow that sediment to get around those dams. And we could effectively double the suspended sediment load in the river. Now, why hasn't the master plan, CPRA, been talking about this? They've heard presentations, and it just goes in one ear and out the other. I find that just egregious. So anyway, that would be a game-changing opportunity to double our sediments and half the cost, and of course make the program much more efficient. Now, I've got another idea that I've been promoting for years without any success at all, a levee design alternative. A lot of the master plan includes levees, and I would say that wherever the landscape that's threatened is not already below sea level, and of course that includes where we are right now. This wouldn't apply, but wherever there is some positive elevation, we should not be building levees that can't be overtopped. We should be building, at least in some areas, sections of levees that are forested, that allow uh, 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 water, some water to overtop, but that also drain because the land is above sea level. This wouldn't be a continuous levee system, it would be discontinuous. And I got this idea right after Katrina when I drove through Waveland in Mississippi and saw the impacts of that storm. It was so dramatic. Most of the human structures had gone, disappeared. But guess what was standing? Live oaks. They were almost untouched. And I was thinking to myself, the state of Mississippi ought to be planting a dense forest of live oaks along that strand. The storm surge was something like 28 feet. It overtopped everything. I mean, it overwhelmed everything. But the energy would be absorbed by these living plants that have incredible. Okay. Enough is okay. This is an idea. I call them Chenier Faux. The idea, at least in some areas, let's test it. The Corps will not allow any conversation about woody vegetation because they say the roots destabilize the soil. These are civil engineers. They don't have any botany background or forestry background. And anyway, next slide. I'm going to pack it. Well, the one before this. Before I really get everybody's blood pressure up, there are some alternative ways that these levees could be planted. And it's just, I got this from some publication that I don't even remember anymore, and it shows that somebody else has been thinking along these same lines. Now, the next bullet, don't change the slide. The next bullet has already been talked about a couple of times, and that's, I hate to use the word, but Puha, a good friend of mine, has to do with relocation. We need to really emphasize relocation, finding some funding to do that. And Pat Forbes is an old friend of mine, former colleague. I know he's heavily involved in it, but PUHA stands for pick up and haul ass. And it sounds very. It's not a nice comment for people who really love the real estate that their grandfather farmed and so on. But at some point, realism has to take over. And I sold a townhouse in Madisonville, close to Madisonville, that I loved. I spent a fortune rebuilding it, and then I gave it away in sale because it was at high risk, and it made no sense to keep trying to claim that it was going to last forever. But anyway, the next bullet, which is don't change. I'm getting there. I'm up to 9. These are 10 points now. I'm up to number 9. The cost. We've already heard a lot and bemoaned the fact that money is so short. How do we expect voters in Indiana to support what we're trying to do, especially if we don't even believe in climate change? And I would say that a word I would like to start to introduce, which of course would never show up in the master plan as currently written, is reparations. Why don't we get oil and gas industry who caused at least 36%, or depending on who you talk to 60%, according to Bob Marshall? I mean, give me a break. How can we go Mesa? Yeah, go Mesa. I think a lot of Mary Landrieu, but it's never been a success. And to increase leasing monies to rebuild our coast didn't cost the industry a damn thing. So anyway, finally, my last slide. Whoever designed this logo? What are they trying to tell us? I mean, I've tried to find the answer to that question. Nobody claimed. Uh-oh. Simone, do you know?
No, I've never liked it either. So
I think it's horrendous. I remember when when I was still in the governor's office, and Jack Caldwell was secretary of DNR. Jack's wife, she's now dead, as is Jack. She was a graphic designer, and she came up with a logo for the Department of Natural Resources that I thought was striking. I thought the colors and it had a good message. This thing, as an artist myself, coming from an artist background, the color is horrible. The message is horrendous. A seawall where the sea seems to be higher than the landscape. I mean, why don't we understand? I used to put on running races and as a business that failed, and I used to worry about graphic design and getting a message with their T-shirts that people felt good about. Nobody should feel good about this logo. Anyway, okay, that's enough.
All right. So one more reminder about the CLE credit sign-in sheet, blue one right over there. So when you do that.
And before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to say something, because some of you in the audience may not know Dr. Barr. He is far more than a cranky former scientist. He's a cranky former public servant. You mentioned the governor's office, but it's multiple governors. He was essentially the head of the coastal program, going back to Governor Claiborne, I believe. But, you know, it was 4 governors, I believe. Five that you
Charlie
served.
Glover and Virginia.
So, you know, he's intimately familiar with the ebbs and flows of success and failure on this, and the importance of being clear about what we're trying to succeed with. I thought you needed to know that.
So maybe the panelists, y'all can just pull some chairs real quick. We've only got really about a little more than 10 minutes to chat. Y'all come up right up here.
I'll take this one. Pushing Lynn somewhere? Where are we going? If you want to sit, I'll sit next to Lynn.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions?
Uh-oh.
All right, let's start over here. Go.
Dr. Barr, I really appreciated your perspective on climate change and how it's kind of the elephant in the room that doesn't get talked about. But I was hoping that Simone and Scott, from the NGO perspective, you could talk about how you're trying to incorporate it into your work, because restoration is for naught if we don't address climate change.
I'm not sure what you, how do we turn this, well, say it again, the last part.
Well, the question is actually for Simone and Scott.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
She
sorry.
liked what you said.
I like to
okay.
You're good. We're not good. So I will say, that was a big discussion in some of the community conversations, even about how we translate. That was a very big difference between the 2012 master plan to the 2017 master plan. The difference in the high environmental scenario, it did swing wildly. And so we had to be able to communicate that, but to Lynn's point, to an audience that doesn't always embrace climate change, right? I will tell you, they understand sea level rise, they understand subsidence, and so we can have all these conversations. Maybe it's just about the words that you use, and so we're talking about people who are from Terrebonne and Lafourche and deep parks. They understand what's happening to their environment probably so much better than I do. But so sometimes it was a way that we just had to have that conversation, and I'll just say that from our perspective. Not that people were not unwilling to have it, I guess.
Yeah, we see incremental progress, I guess, and that's maybe the theme. We have a good planning process. There's more that needs to be in it. 2012, we had some bad sea level rise estimates. 2017, the new plan had much better things that we commented. We asked for that in 2012. We got a lot of what we wanted in 2017. It's not everything, right? We look across the globe. Offshore Gulf and U.S. fracking are big sources of increased CO2 to the climate globally. So we know that we have a lot of those two sources of our own problem in our own backyard. but this is a plan. It's not being run by the legislature, but it does have to pass the Louisiana legislature. So there are, I would say, substantial oil and gas interest in that up-down vote.
But it's been unanimous so far.
It's been unanimous vote up so far. So we do see progress, and so I think yes, we acknowledge that completely. We see it as steady as she goes.
And it evolves. I mean, and like Scott said, you can see it evolving over time. You can see that happening.
Maybe if I could just piggyback off that real quick. Whether you call it climate change or not, I mean, does the plan need to address the source of emissions? You know, the plan is more focused on restoration and protection, but I think maybe this is kind of where you're coming from, Lynn, is that it doesn't address some of the emissions that are kind of causing some of the sea level rise and that sort of thing.
Well,
Is that even in the purview of the plan?
I don't expect the plan to take on the mission of global greenhouse gas reduction. I do expect the plan to acknowledge this existential threat and to show how the context in which we describe our issue needs to recognize the global context. And I don't think it does that adequately. And why not? I mean, well, I think I know why not. I mean, the plan went from public meetings and discussion to the legislators, the natural resources committees for signatures and the governor's signature. And my recommendation that an explicit disclaimer be on that same signature page would force these people. You know they're going to vote for the plan. They've got to vote for the plan. They'll approve it. But why not force them to say, oh my God, look what I'm voting for. I'm saying climate change is a problem. I think our politics is just not, we're not using it effectively.
Len, I'm so happy to see you here. Barry Cole, worked
Good
with
to see you,
Len
Barry.
for a long time. I just wanted to comment on the issue of Morganza to the Gulf, which you called the home of wall. And
that was somebody else's.
Well, I completely agree with you on that, and I was really astounded to see that it was included in the master plan. When the Corps did the EIS for that levee system, Morganza to the Gulf, they said in their statement that there'd be 70,000 acres of wetlands potentially developable within the levee system. EPA asked them to take that out, and the Corps refused. The other issue was they're including a wildlife refuge within there to protect the wildlife refuge from storm surge.
Yeah.
And what they have built in are gates to allow the water to go in and out to protect the wildlife refuge. And here's the kicker. As sea level rises, they're going to have to close the gates permanently. So you're going to have no connection between the interior wetlands and the sea. It's crazy.
And not only that, the Corps has put an $11 billion price tag on that project,
Yeah.
which, where is that going to come from? It's not mentioned. You have to read the fine print in the master plan to even see the name. Morganza, the most expensive project. So that's not honest with the public.
No, it's not.
You know, and I know it's politically sacred in Houma, and I understand that. But we got to be honest with the public, and that project is never going to be completed. But anyway,
Well, the Corps has been dishonest,
yes.
I think, in promoting it. They have been open in telling what the future plans for the project would be, and that's potentially developable wetlands,
Yeah.
and that the area is going to be completely isolated from the ecological system.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, let's move on to another question.
Yep.
Yeah, in the back.
Yes. I missed the first few minutes of your conversation, so I hope this wasn't answered earlier, but the Coastal Master Plan, as Dr. Barr stated, how can you conscionably sell this to the American people or the people of Louisiana without including the Chapelot Basin?
So I will dispute that only a little bit.
And I have a follow-up question.
They do have major projects, one that we work on intimately, and it was included in LCA, and it's about moving fresh water from the Atchafalaya into Terrebonne. Just fresh water. They need the sediment as well. That's been a project that's been around for a very long time and was actually received National Fish and Wildlife Foundation funds. And so that's a project going on. But then also in the master plan, they have a much larger diversion called the Atchafalaya diversion. It goes up. It's several tens of thousands of CFS. So I will dispute that a little bit. I do think that that is an area that needs to be improved upon, but it begins there. There is work there. I will also say that that recently some of the conversations have just swirled around Old River control structure and what that piece of, you know, unbelievable engineering. But what if that were to ever fail? How much would that ever cost to rebuild? It could be, you know, what. So lots and lots of new conversations centering around over Old River control structure. But I do only want to defend that the Atchafalaya is healthy, and what we're trying to do is siphon off some of that good stuff that they're getting. I've been in so many public meetings where, you know, the mayor of Morgan City is like, you got to take this stuff from me. And then we're like in Terrebonne, like, yeah, hey, over here. So, but I do want to only defend that I think that the Atchafalaya Delta does have a piece there.
And I think we've seen those projects, and we've also seen some incremental improvements where, you know, the sense of the connection of the basin to the coast, that boundary keeps creeping northward. And we need it to, I think we just need to, again, keep pushing that question until it gets to Old River.
The Atchafalaya Basin is controlled between the Corps and a board appointed by the governor that doesn't have a pulse. They give contracts. The second part of the question is, how can you put any slides up on the CPRA with not ever showing the exploration canals, as Dr. Brown referred to, and the impact they've had on coastal wetland loss? It isn't even on your agenda.
We got 20
In your
minutes to
meetings.
talk.
And this is a CPRA person, Doctor. How can you do that in all good conscience without discussing the exploration?
I don't work for the CPRA.
Nobody here represents CPRA.
That's a good point right there. Enough said.
Okay, one more right here.
The Caminata Headlands project, which took about 15 years to plan and finally build and cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
That's quick, Kathy. I don't know what you're talking about.
And, you know, initially the cost included maintenance and monitoring, which became too costly, so they cut it out. And after they built it, subsidence studies showed that immediately once they put the sediment on top of the beach, it sank quite a bit, I think a foot. And the lifespan of that project is maybe 20 years. So as we look forward with the master plan, are, you know, how about, you know, the repeat building of some of these necessary projects? I mean, is the lifespan of these projects included? Is there anything that looks at the failure rates with or without hurricanes? 20 years is a good scenario for Caminata if there are no storms.
I think that's a very good question, Kathy. So certainly Caminata is, you know, it's been a long time in planning, but in so many ways it did seem like it came up quick. They built it quickly. They did 2 different increments funded with CF funds and state surplus funds, and then certainly the second major component was post-oil spill. Right. They recently just got a Quicker project, and there's another one coming that's really, that is helping to build momentum. But I do know that we've been in some conversations with folks about Caminata now being an example of how do we deal with barrier island maintenance and this tremendous investment in that. How do we deal with that from an ongoing perspective? And certainly somebody like FEMA is a major player there, right? They get tapped all the time to pay us back after a storm or something to help rebuild, whether it be the shoreline breakwaters or something. And FEMA's finally starting to be like, no, you can't, this is, you know, but so that is beginning to be a part of the discussion as well. And we do need to fast forward that some, especially as we're building, basically rebuilding the entire barrier island chains, but they do have a very short life to them. and especially you pile hurricanes on top of that. And the only good news, I would say from my non-scientific perspective, is that they're bringing sediment in from an outside source, so the sediment they're not robbing Peter to pay Paul within the system. They are bringing men in from Ship Shoal, and so at least there's new sediment in the system. But I think that is going to be a programmatic thing that the state will have to tackle as they invest in these major projects. They'll have to start thinking about things programmatically. To Lynn's tree point, too, I think that is programmatic, that they will have to start thinking about these things on a coast-wide level, and that the state, that may be the next evolution of a master plan, is more programmatic versus projects.
One quick
Maybe
question.
we have time for one more.
One quick question to Scott. Now, we're about the Mardi Gras diversion in Clackamas Parish. We all agree that's $1.5 billion gift from Mother Nature. Now, does your authority, are you going to act as an observer, or do you really get in the trenches? Or what is your influence on a project like that? A free gift from God. What are you going to do?
Scott, what do you do with free gifts from God?
Celebrate it. Praise every day.
What influence do you
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of the river giving us a gift, and I do think CPRA is on board with that position, although we'll see. It's interesting because in this case, it's not an industrial conflict with the river diversion question. It's a government subdivision. It's Clackamas Parish taking on this project, basically to dam what has grown into a new arm of the Mississippi River. It's implementing several projects that have been planned, but were never funded. Just by action of gravity. So there are, there are interests that oppose these diversions because of changes in the salinity, particularly from oystermen. And I think the parish is probably sympathetic. Seems more sympathetic to those concerns. We do think there's a need for more oyster restoration in the plan. That's one of the things that hasn't been there. So I think as an advocacy organization, we're going to comment on that permit application about the costs and benefits to shutting off this gift. We don't, I guess to sum up, I mean, I need to do a little more research, do more homework, but basically we don't think they would achieve salinity control by shutting off the land building function. And so if
There's other leaks, I think, too, in the system.
there's Fort St. Philip, which is about 10 times as large in that area, so I don't think it would be effective. I don't think it's going to do what they want it to do to block that pass, and I do think it's going to be quite negative in for other ecosystems.
My colleague Gene Turner has been trying to get a question for a long time.
Thank you for the...
Favoritism. I said favoritism.
And thank you for your comments on Len, in particular for your kind of broad view of this, which we have a common background to, I think. So in terms of the gift of God, we have to look at the world of God, which is the larger picture, which includes climate change. But in this case, the sediments that came down, that they doubled the sediment load when Europeans entered the landscape. And so when they went down to half, it was partly because, in the 50s, because of soil conservation and all the rest. And when that happened, the Clackamas Parish shrunk by a proportional amount. And then, and all the sediment is basically, it builds lands, is trapped in the river. So that's consistent. So if you put diversions into Mardi Gras Pass, it's not going to grow land somewhere else or maintain land. If you put it up here, you're going to lose land down there. And I would like to see some net benefits shown instead of taking these little pieces and saying we're going to gain land if they work, because Fort St. Philip lost 58% of its land. But if you grow it up here, what happens down here? You're going to lose it. That's our model. That's the data for the model. I don't know how we can escape that. This is a shuffling the land pieces if it works. Not a game. We can't take it out of context. This wasn't a gift of God. That was an opening over here that has a larger context of the world of God, if you want to be Christian about this. I mean, over here, it wasn't gaining and we're losing.
No.
It's just moving pieces.
Okay,
Unless you can tell me otherwise.
So we're already well past time. Thanks so much for coming. I know we felt like we just started chatting, but yeah, thanks for coming.